Every single person who has ever donated to charity, volunteered at a homeless shelter, or jumped into a river to save a drowning stranger did it for one reason: themselves. Before you close this video in disgust, before you start typing angry comments about how your grandmother was a saint who never thought of herself, hear me out. Because what I'm about to tell you will completely flip your understanding of human nature. And it might just make you feel better about being human. The idea that everyone is fundamentally selfish isn't an accusation, it's liberation. For centuries we've been trapped in a false dichotomy that says people are either good or bad, selfless or selfish, altruistic or narcissistic. But what if I told you that this entire framework is wrong? What if the most selfless acts in human history were actually the most selfish acts imaginable, and that's exactly what makes them beautiful? Picture Mother Teresa spending her life caring for the poorest of the poor in Calcutta. Picture firefighters running into burning buildings to save strangers. Picture your friend who always listens when you need to vent, even when they're dealing with their own problems. Now, what if I told you that every single one of these people did what they did because it felt good to them, because it aligned with their deepest sense of who they wanted to be, because on some fundamental level it served their own psychological needs? Does that make their actions less noble? Or does it reveal something profound about how goodness actually works in the world? We've been asking the wrong question. Instead of, are people selfish or altruistic? We should be asking, what kind of selfishness creates the most good in the world? Because here's the secret that philosophers, psychologists, and neuroscientists are just beginning to understand. Altruism doesn't exist in spite of selfishness. It exists because of it. The very thing we've been taught to suppress might be the key to unleashing the greatest good we're capable of. This isn't cynicism, this is realism. And this realism, paradoxically, is the foundation for the most beautiful expression of human nature you can imagine. But to understand how we got here, we need to start with a story that will challenge everything you think you know about motivation, morality, and what it means to be good. Let me tell you about Marcus, a hedge fund manager in Manhattan who, by every external measure, was the epitome of selfishness. Marcus worked 80-hour weeks, drove a car worth more than most people's houses, and lived in a penthouse overlooking Central Park. His life was a monument to self-interest. He optimized everything for maximum personal gain: his investments, his relationships, even his workout routine was designed to make him more attractive and successful. But Marcus had a problem. Despite having everything he thought he wanted, he felt empty, not just unhappy, empty. Like he was living someone else's life, playing someone else's game, pursuing someone else's definition of success. The turning point came on a Tuesday morning in December. Marcus was walking to work when he passed a homeless veteran sitting outside a coffee shop. Something about the man's dignity, despite his circumstances, stopped Marcus in his tracks. For reasons he couldn't explain, Marcus found himself buying the man breakfast and sitting down to talk. That conversation lasted 2 hours. Marcus learned about the veteran's service in Afghanistan, his struggle with PTSD, his family back home who didn't understand what he'd been through. And something remarkable happened. For the first time in years, Marcus forgot about himself entirely. When Marcus finally returned to his office, his assistant asked where he'd been. "I was being selfish," Marcus replied, though he couldn't explain what he meant. That evening, Marcus did something unprecedented. Instead of working late or networking at some industry event, he went back to find the veteran. They talked again. Marcus learned his name was Robert, and Robert had stories that made Marcus's corporate dramas seem trivial. This became a routine. Every Tuesday, Marcus would spend his lunch break with Robert. But here's where the story gets interesting. Marcus wasn't doing this out of some noble sense of duty. He was doing it because those conversations were the best part of his week. For the first time in his adult life, Marcus felt like himself. Not the version of himself that maximized profit margins or impressed clients, but the version that was genuinely curious about another human being's experience. The version that could listen without calculating what to say next. Marcus began to realize something unsettling. His most selfish hour of the week, the time he spent with Robert, expecting nothing in return, was also the hour when he felt most alive, most authentic, most like the person he actually wanted to be. 6 months later, Marcus did something that shocked everyone who knew him. He left his hedge fund job and started a non-profit organization focused on veteran housing. His family thought he'd lost his mind. His former colleagues assumed he was having a midlife crisis, but Marcus knew better. He wasn't becoming less selfish. He was becoming selfish in a completely different way. Instead of being selfish for his ego, he was being selfish for his soul. The non-profit became one of the most successful veteran support organizations in the city. Marcus worked harder than he ever had at the hedge fund, but it didn't feel like work. It felt like the most elaborate form of self-care imaginable. Years later, when people praised Marcus for his selfless dedication to veterans, he would smile and think, if only they knew how good this makes me feel. Marcus had discovered what philosophers have debated for millennia. There's no such thing as pure altruism, and that's exactly why altruism is possible. But Marcus's story is just the beginning. Because once you understand that all human action is fundamentally self-interested, you unlock a secret about human nature that changes everything. The idea that all human behavior is fundamentally self-interested isn't new. What's new is understanding why this leads to goodness rather than evil. Let's start with the neuroscience. Dr. Antonio Damasio's groundbreaking research on the brain's reward systems shows us something remarkable. When people engage in altruistic behavior, their brains light up in exactly the same regions that activate during other pleasurable experiences. Helping others literally feels good, neurochemically, physiologically, measurably good. This phenomenon has a name: helpers high. When we do something genuinely helpful for another person, our brains release a cocktail of feel-good chemicals: dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin. It's the same neurochemical reward system that motivates us to eat, have sex, or accomplish goals. But here's where it gets fascinating. This helper's high is more potent and longer lasting than most other forms of pleasure. Dr. Alan Luke studied thousands of volunteers and found that people who regularly helped others reported better physical health, lower stress levels, and greater life satisfaction than control groups. From a purely selfish perspective, altruism is one of the best investments you can make in your own well-being. Dr. Elizabeth Dunn's research at the University of British Columbia took this further. She gave people money and randomly assigned them to spend it either on themselves or on others. The people who spent money on others reported significantly higher levels of happiness afterward, even though they had less money. Think about the implications here. Our brains are literally wired to get more satisfaction from giving than from getting. Evolution didn't design us this way by accident. This is where Charles Darwin's insights become crucial. In The Descent of Man, Darwin grappled with what seemed like an evolutionary impossibility. If survival of the fittest is the driving force of evolution, why do humans consistently risk their own survival to help others? The answer lies in understanding what fitness actually means in evolutionary terms. It's not about individual survival. It's about the survival of genes, of communities, of our species as a whole. Dr. Robert Trivers developed the theory of reciprocal altruism to explain this phenomenon. We help others not just because it might benefit us directly, but because living in a community where help is freely given benefits everyone, including ourselves. But even reciprocal altruism is ultimately self-interested. We create networks of mutual aid because we intuitively understand that we'll need help ourselves someday. The person who helps their neighbor move isn't just being nice, they're investing in a community where people help each other move. This extends to what psychologists call reputation management. Dr. Pat Barclay's research shows that people are more altruistic when others are watching, not because they're being fake, but because they intuitively understand that a reputation for helpfulness is valuable social currency. But here's where it gets really interesting. Even when people help others purely to feel good about themselves, the help is just as valuable to the recipient. The motivation doesn't change the outcome. The ancient Stoics understood this paradox profoundly. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. But I have seen the beauty of good and the ugliness of evil and have recognized that the wrongdoer has a nature related to my own." Notice what Marcus is doing here. He's not being altruistic out of pure selflessness. He's being altruistic because he recognizes that creating a world where people treat each other well serves his own own deepest interests. Epictetus taught that we should help others not because we're obligated to, but because doing so aligns us with our highest nature. This isn't selflessness, it's the highest form of selfishness imaginable. Eastern philosophy offers similar insights. In Buddhism, the concept of interdependence suggests that helping others is ultimately helping yourself because, well, there is no fundamental separation between self and other. This isn't mystical thinking, it's practical wisdom about how human societies actually function. The Dalai Lama puts it beautifully. If you want others to be happy, practice compassion. If you want to be happy, practice compassion. Notice the structure of this advice, it's entirely self-interested. Compassion is recommended not as a sacrifice, but as a strategy for personal well-being. Dr. Adam Grant's research on givers, takers, and matchers reveals something unexpected about success and self-interest. In his studies of thousands of professionals, he found that the least successful people were givers. People who helped others without regard for their own interests, but interestingly, the most successful people were also givers. The difference, the most successful givers had learned to be strategic about their giving. They helped others in ways that also served their own goals and values. They were simultaneously selfless and selfish. This reveals a crucial insight. Pure altruism and pure selfishness are both dysfunctional. The sweet spot is enlightened self-interest, pursuing your own well-being in ways that also benefit others. Dr. Kristin Neff's research on self-compassion adds another layer to this understanding. She found that people who are genuinely kind to themselves are more capable of being kind to others. Self-care isn't the opposite of caring for others. It's the prerequisite. You can't give what you don't have. If you're not meeting your own needs for respect, understanding, and care, you'll eventually burn out trying to meet those needs for others. Neuroscientist Dr. Marco Iacoboni's research on mirror neurons provides the biological foundation for understanding why selfishness and altruism are inextricably linked. Mirror neurons fire both when we perform an action and when we observe others performing the same action. This means that when we see someone else experience joy, our brains partially experience that joy too. When we see someone in pain, we feel a shadow of that pain. At a neurological level, the boundaries between self and other are more porous than we imagine. Helping others feel good literally makes us feel good, not because we're being noble, but because our brains are wired to share experiences. Altruism is enlightened selfishness operating through the architecture of human empathy. But here's where the plot thickens. Not all selfishness is created equal. There's a world of difference between what we might call destructive selfishness and constructive selfishness. Understanding this difference is the key to everything that follows. Destructive selfishness operates from what Stephen Covey called the scarcity mindset, the belief that there's not enough good to go around. If you get more love, respect, or success, that means there's less for me. This type of selfishness is actually self-defeating. People trapped in destructive selfishness often end up with less of what they want, not more. They hoard resources instead of investing them. They compete instead of collaborating. They burn bridges in pursuit of short-term gains. Consider the corporate executive who lies to get ahead, the friend who gossips to feel superior, or the partner who manipulates to get their way. These people are absolutely being selfish, but they're being stupid about it. Destructive selfishness is like eating only dessert. It feels good in the moment, but makes you sick in the long run. It prioritizes immediate gratification over long-term well-being. Constructive selfishness operates from an abundance mindset, the understanding that helping others succeed often creates more opportunities for your own success. This type of selfishness is strategic and sustainable. It recognizes that we live in interconnected systems where individual thriving and collective thriving are linked. The entrepreneur who treats employees well because happy employees are more productive. The parent who models kindness because they want their children to live in a kinder world. The neighbor who helps with community projects because they want to live in a thriving neighborhood. These people are still being selfish, they're just being smart about it. And Robert Axelrod's famous computer tournaments on cooperation provide a mathematical foundation for understanding constructive selfishness. In repeated interactions, the most successful strategy isn't pure selfishness or pure altruism, it's tit for tat with forgiveness. This strategy starts by cooperating, then mirrors what the other person does, but Occasionally forgives defection and tries cooperation again. It's simultaneously self-interested, since it doesn't let others take advantage, and other interested because it creates opportunities for mutual benefit. In real life, this looks like being kind to others while maintaining healthy boundaries. It's helping others succeed while also pursuing your own goals. And well, it's being generous with your time and resources while not martyring yourself. Dr. Robert Putnam's research on social capital reveals why constructive selfishness is so effective. People with strong social networks, built through helping others and being helped in return, live longer, earn more, and report higher life satisfaction. Being the kind of person others want to help isn't just nice, it's strategically brilliant. When you consistently add value to others' lives, you create a network of people who are invested in your success. This is why the most successful people in almost every field tend to be generous with their knowledge, connections, and resources. They understand that hoarding social capital is like hoarding money under a mattress. It doesn't grow, and it doesn't work for you. Here's where constructive selfishness gets really interesting. It requires you to be authentic in ways that destructive selfishness doesn't. When you're trying to manipulate others for short-term gain, you can fake emotions, interests, and values. But when you're building long-term relationships based on mutual benefit, authenticity becomes essential. People can sense when someone genuinely cares about their well-being versus when someone is just going through the motions. This means that constructive selfishness forces you to develop the very qualities that make life meaningful. Genuine curiosity about others, real empathy for their struggles, authentic care for their success. You become a better person, not because you're trying to be good, but because honestly, being a better person serves your self-interest. Now let's dive deeper into the psychological mechanisms that make this paradox possible. Dr. Dan Ariely's research on dishonesty reveals something crucial about human motivation. People don't cheat as much as they could, even when there's no chance of getting caught. Why? Because our self-concept is one of our most valuable psychological assets, and we're surprisingly protective of it. Most people want to see themselves as good, honest, and helpful. This desire is so strong that we'll often act against our immediate self-interest to maintain a positive self-image. We help others partly because helping others allows us to see ourselves as the kind of person who helps others. This is still selfishness. It's just selfishness in service of a more complex goal than immediate gratification. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, made a profound observation. Humans can endure almost any suffering if they can find meaning in it. But he discovered something else. The most reliable source of meaning comes from contributing to something larger than ourselves. This creates what we might call the meaning paradox. We pursue meaning for selfish reasons because meaningless lives feel unbearable. But meaning itself requires us to focus on something beyond our immediate self-interest. Dr. Adam Grant's research confirms this. People who find their work meaningful aren't those who are directly rewarded for every task. They're people who can see how their individual contributions connect to outcomes they care about. A janitor at a hospital isn't just cleaning floors, they're helping create an environment where healing can happen. A teacher isn't just delivering information, they're shaping the minds that will solve tomorrow's problems. This shift in perspective transforms selfish motivation into altruistic action without changing the underlying drive for personal satisfaction and meaning. Dr. Sonia Lyubomirsky's extensive research on happiness reveals that about 50% of our happiness level is determined by genetics, 10% by circumstances, and 40% by intentional activities. And here's the kicker. The activities that most reliably boost happiness are those that involve helping others. But why would evolution wire us this way? Because humans are social animals. Our survival and thriving have always depended on our ability to work together effectively. The people who felt good when they helped their tribe were more likely to create tribes that thrived, which meant they were more likely to survive and reproduce. Your brain's reward system isn't broken when it makes you feel good for helping others. It's working exactly as designed. You're not betraying your self-interest when you're altruistic. You're expressing the highest form of self-interest possible. Dr. Paul Zach's research on oxytocin often called the bonding hormone, shows that acts of kindness create a chemical cascade that benefits both giver and receiver. When you help someone, your brain releases oxytocin, which reduces stress, boosts immune function, and increases feelings of connection and trust. But it gets better. The person you helped also releases oxytocin, making them more likely to help others in the future. And remarkably, even people who simply witness acts of kindness experience what researchers call elevation, a specific emotional state that inspires them to be more helpful themselves. This means that every act of kindness creates ripple effects that eventually circle back to benefit the original helper. It's selfishness with compound interest. Immanuel Kant argued that truly moral actions must be performed out of duty rather than inclination, but modern psychology suggests Kant had it backwards. Actions performed out of genuine inclination because they align with our authentic values and bring us joy are more sustainable and ultimately more beneficial than actions performed out of grim obligation. The utilitarian philosophers, like John Stuart Mill, understood this intuitively. They argued that the right action is the one that creates the greatest good for the greatest number. But they also understood that this principle only works if people are motivated to follow it, and the strongest motivation is enlightened self-interest. Aristotle's concept of eudaimonia, often translated as happiness, but really closer to flourishing, provides perhaps the clearest framework for understanding constructive selfishness. Eudaimonia isn't about feeling good moment to moment. It's about living in a way that expresses your highest potential as a human being. And what is our highest potential as human beings? Aristotle argued it's our capacity for reason, virtue, and community. In other words, we flourish most fully when we use our minds well, act according to our values, and contribute to the well-being of others. This isn't selflessness. It's actually the most sophisticated form of selfishness imaginable. So how do you put this understanding into practice? How do you become the kind of selfish person who creates the most good in the world? Start by identifying what you actually value, not just what you think you should value. When are you most energized? What kinds of problems do you find yourself naturally wanting to solve? What injustices make you genuinely angry? Your authentic values are your guide to constructive selfishness. When you help others in ways that align with your deep values, you're not sacrificing yourself, you're expressing yourself. If you value creativity, volunteer to teach art to kids. If you value justice, support causes that fight inequality. If you value learning, mentor someone in a skill you've mastered. The goal isn't to help others despite your self-interest, but really to find ways to help others that serve your highest self-interest. Think of kindness as an investment rather than an expense. Every positive interaction you have with another person is a deposit in what Stephen Covey called your emotional bank account with that person. But here's the strategic insight. You don't know which relationships will become most valuable to you in the future. The barista you're kind to today might be the startup founder you want to work with tomorrow. The junior colleague you mentor now might be the CEO who remembers your generosity later. This isn't about being manipulative, it's about recognizing that kindness creates options. When you're consistently helpful to others, you create a network of people who want to see you succeed. Take whatever work you're already doing and, find ways to connect it to outcomes you care about. This doesn't require changing jobs, it requires changing perspective. If you're an accountant, you're not just managing numbers, you're helping businesses thrive, which creates jobs and serves customers. If you're a server, you're not just bringing food, you're creating experiences and moments of connection for people when you can see how your daily actions contribute to outcomes you genuinely care about. Work stops feeling like sacrifice and starts feeling like service. And service, paradoxically, is the most selfish thing you can do because it makes you feel needed, valuable, and aligned with your purpose. Dr. Robert Emmons' research on gratitude shows that grateful people are more generous, and generous people are more grateful. This creates what psychologists call a positive feedback loop. But here's the strategic application. When you express genuine gratitude to others, you're not just being polite. You're training your brain to notice positive aspects of your relationships and experiences. This makes you naturally more inclined to maintain and strengthen those relationships. Start each day by identifying one person you're grateful for and why. Then find a way to express that gratitude. Watch how this simple practice transforms both your relationships and your overall satisfaction with life. Here's one of the most counterintuitive insights. The better you get at saying no to things that don't serve you, the more generous you can be with things that do. People with poor boundaries often become resentful helpers. They say yes to everything and end up bitter about their own generosity. People with good boundaries become joyful helpers. They choose carefully where to invest their energy, which means they can invest it wholeheartedly. Learn to distinguish between helping others and people-pleasing. Helping others feels energizing because it aligns with your values. People-pleasing feels draining because it contradicts your authentic needs and desires. Ask yourself this question: how do I want to be remembered? Not for ego reasons, but for clarity reasons. Your legacy is the ultimate expression of your long-term self-interest. Do you want to be remembered as someone who accumulated the most stuff, or as someone who made others feel valued, as someone who won the most arguments, or as someone who helped others find their voice, as someone who protected their own interests, or as someone who expanded the definition of their interests to include the well-being of others? When you operate from a legacy perspective, short-term selfishness starts to look like short-term thinking. Long-term selfishness starts to look a lot like what we used to call altruism. Understand that every act of genuine helpfulness is an investment in a world where helpfulness is valued. You're not just helping one person, you're modeling behavior that others will copy, creating cultural momentum toward cooperation rather than competition. This is perhaps the most enlightened form of selfishness, recognizing that you have to live in whatever world you help create. If you want to live in a world where people help each other, you need to be part of creating that world. Once you understand that altruism and selfishness are not opposites but partners, everything changes. Your relationships change, your work changes, your entire approach to life transforms. When you stop trying to be selfless and start trying to be constructively selfish, something magical happens. You become more authentic, not less. Think about it. When you help others because you should, you're performing goodness. When you help others because it aligns with your genuine values and brings you joy, you're expressing goodness. Performance is exhausting. Expression is energizing. People can sense the difference immediately. Performed kindness feels obligatory and slightly uncomfortable. Expressed kindness feels natural and contagious. Dr. Teresa Amabile's research on creativity reveals that people are most innovative when they're intrinsically motivated, when they're doing something because it genuinely interests them rather than because they feel obligated to do it. This has profound implications for how we approach helping others. When you find ways to help that genuinely excite you, you bring creativity, energy, and innovation to your altruism. You find solutions that pure obligation would never discover. Marcus didn't just start any non-profit, he started one that combined his financial expertise with his genuine care for veterans. His selfish interests, like using his skills, feeling meaningful, and being authentic, aligned perfectly with others' needs, such as veteran housing, creating innovations that pure altruism might have missed. When individuals practice enlightened self-interest, entire communities transform. Instead of cultures based on sacrifice and obligation, we get cultures based on mutual benefit and shared thriving. Dr. Robert Cialdini's research on social norms shows that people are remarkably influenced by what they perceive as normal behavior in their community. When helping others becomes seen as a smart, self-interested choice rather than a moral obligation, more people choose to help. See, this creates what economists call positive externalities, benefits that extend beyond the immediate participants in an exchange. When you're kind to the grocery store clerk because it makes you feel good about yourself, you brighten their day, which might make them kinder to the next customer, which might make that person kinder to their family, and so on. Your enlightened selfishness becomes part of a wave of positivity that eventually reaches back to benefit you in ways you never directly intended. Dr. Stephanie Brown's research at the University of Michigan found something remarkable. People who helped others regularly had lower stress levels and better health outcomes than people who focused primarily on receiving help. This might seem a bit backwards until you understand the psychology involved. When you're focused primarily on getting your needs met by others, you're constantly monitoring whether you're receiving enough attention, support, and care. And honestly, this kind of monitoring is cognitively exhausting. But when you're focused primarily on meeting others' needs in ways that also satisfy your own, you're actually operating from abundance rather than scarcity. You feel in control of your ability to create positive experiences rather than dependent on others to provide them. The old model of leadership was based on authority and control, getting others to do what you want them to do. The new model of leadership is based on service and alignment, creating conditions where others can do their best work because it serves their interests too. Leaders who understand enlightened self-interest don't try to suppress their team's self-interest, they channel it. They help people see how achieving team goals serves individual goals. They create win-win scenarios where everyone gets what they want by working together effectively. This isn't manipulation, it's orchestration. It's recognizing that sustainable motivation must ultimately be self-generated, and the leader's job is to create contexts where people's authentic motivations can align with collective outcomes. As we near the end of this journey, let's address the elephant in the room. Doesn't this entire framework make human goodness seem less special? If altruism is just sophisticated selfishness, does that diminish its value? I believe it does the opposite. There's something deeply beautiful about a species that evolved to feel good when helping others. You know, we could have evolved differently. We could have been wired to feel joy only when we dominate others, or to feel satisfaction only when we hoard resources. But instead, we evolved to be the kind of creatures who literally cannot feel fully fulfilled unless we're contributing to something beyond ourselves. That's not a bug in human nature. It's the most elegant feature imaginable. When a mother stays up all night caring for a sick child, she's absolutely being selfish. She's protecting the most important thing in her world, expressing her deepest values and fulfilling her most profound sense of purpose. And you know what? The fact that this also serves the child's needs perfectly doesn't make it less selfish. It makes it brilliantly selfish. The real breakthrough comes when you stop seeing selfishness and altruism as conflicting forces and start seeing them as aspects of a more complex, more beautiful whole. You are an individual with your own needs, desires, and goals. You are also a social being whose well-being is inextricably linked to the well-being of others. These aren't contradictory truths. They're actually complementary truths. The healthiest, happiest, most effective people aren't those who have chosen selfishness over altruism or altruism over selfishness. They're people who have integrated both into a coherent approach to living. They pursue their own growth because growth enables them to contribute more to others. They take care of their own needs because self-care enables them to care for others sustainably. They follow their own interests because their authentic interests naturally include the well-being of others. This understanding doesn't lower the bar for human behavior, it raises it. When you recognize that helping others serves your deepest self-interest, you can no longer excuse selfish behavior as just human nature. Destructive selfishness isn't human nature. It's immature human nature. It's what happens when people haven't yet developed the wisdom to see that their long-term interests are best served by considering others' interests too. Mature human nature is enlightened self-interest, the recognition that in an interconnected world, the best way to serve yourself is often to serve others. Once you understand that altruism is enlightened selfishness, you can no longer wait for others to be kind first. You can no longer justify your own selfishness by pointing to others' selfishness. If helping others serves your own deepest interests, then failing to help others is ultimately failing to serve yourself. You become responsible not just for your direct actions, but for the kind of world your actions help create. This is simultaneously more demanding and more liberating than traditional approaches to morality. More demanding because you can't excuse harmful behavior as just looking out for myself. More liberating because you can pursue goodness for its own sake without feeling like you're sacrificing yourself. We began this journey with a shocking claim. Everyone is selfish, and that's why altruism exists. We end with an even more shocking realization. This isn't a limitation of human nature, it's human nature's greatest achievement. We are the only species that has evolved the capacity to find our deepest fulfillment in the service of others. We are the only creatures who can experience joy so profound in giving that it surpasses the joy of receiving. We are the only beings who can feel genuinely proud of making others proud. This is what philosopher Douglas Hofstadter calls a strange loop, a system that somehow contains itself where the distinction between self and other becomes beautifully blurred. When you help others because it makes you feel good about who you are, you're not being fake, you're being human in the most sophisticated way possible. You're operating from what Abraham Maslow called self-actualization, the drive to become the fullest expression of your potential. And what is our potential as human beings? To be individuals who thrive through helping others thrive, to be selfish in ways that serve the common good, to find our own meaning through contributing to others' meaning. Right now, you have a choice. You can continue seeing selfishness and altruism as opposing forces, which means you'll spend your life torn between them, feeling guilty when you pursue your own interests and resentful when you serve others. Or you can recognize that the highest form of self-interest is other interest, and the most reliable path to personal fulfillment runs directly through service to others. This doesn't mean becoming a martyr or ignoring your own needs. It means becoming strategic about your selfishness. It means pursuing your own well-being in ways that also promote others' well-being. It means recognizing that in a connected world, there is no such thing as purely individual success or purely individual failure. Here's the beautiful final twist in this story. The moment you truly accept that you're fundamentally selfish is often the moment you become capable of the most generous acts imaginable. When you stop fighting your self-interest and start channeling it wisely, you stop wasting energy on guilt and start investing energy in growth. You stop performing goodness and start living it. You stop trying to be someone you're not and start becoming the best version of who you are. Tomorrow, someone will notice how you treat the person serving your coffee. Someone will observe how you respond when a colleague makes a mistake. Someone will watch how you handle disagreement, disappointment, or, even unexpected kindness. They won't know you've learned about enlightened self-interest. They won't understand the philosophy behind your actions. But they'll feel something different in how you interact with the world, something more genuine, more present, more alive. And that feeling will influence how they treat the next person they encounter, and that person will carry it forward to the next person, and so on. Your decision to embrace enlightened selfishness creates ripples you'll never see, reaching people you'll never meet, solving problems you'll never know existed. Perhaps most importantly, understanding that everyone is fundamentally selfish gives you permission to be fundamentally selfish too, in the most beautiful way possible. You don't have to pretend you don't have needs. You don't have to suppress your desires for meaning, connection, and impact. You don't have to choose between being good to yourself and being good to others. You can pursue your own flourishing wholeheartedly, knowing that your truest flourishing will naturally include the flourishing of others. You can be ambitious for yourself, knowing that your highest ambitions will serve purposes larger than yourself. You can finally stop feeling guilty for wanting to feel good about your life, because feeling good about your life, when it's built on genuine value creation and authentic relationships, is exactly what the world needs more of. So here's what I want you to do right now, before you click to the next video or scroll to the next post. Think of one person in your life who could use help with something you're naturally good at. Not because you owe them something, not because it's your duty, but because helping them would allow you to express something valuable about who you are. Reach out to them, offer your help, but do it honestly, not as a sacrifice, but as an investment in the kind of person you want to be and the kind of world you want to live in. Pay attention to how it feels. Notice the satisfaction that comes not from their gratitude, though that's nice, but from the alignment between your actions and your values. Notice how helping them helps you feel more like yourself, that feeling. That's enlightened self-interest in action. That's what it feels like when selfishness and altruism stop being enemies and become dance partners. We started with a provocative claim that everyone is selfish. We end with a profound realization. If everyone is selfish, and if the smartest form of selfishness is helping others thrive, then a world full of selfish people is exactly what we want. The problem was never that people are selfish. The problem was that we taught them to be selfish in small, short-sighted ways instead of selfish in wise, far-seeing ways. The solution isn't to make people less selfish. The solution is to help them understand what enlightened selfishness looks like. And it looks like kindness, it looks like generosity, it looks like service, it looks like love. Not because these things require us to transcend our self-interest, but because these things are our self-interest, properly understood. In the end, the most selfish thing you can do is become the kind of person you would want to meet. The most selfish thing you can do is create the kind of world you would want to live in. The most selfish thing you can do is live in a way that makes you proud of who you're becoming. And when millions of people make that same selfish choice, we don't get a world full of selfish people. We get a world full of people who are wise enough to know that their own thriving and others' thriving are the same project, approached from different angles. We get a world where goodness isn't a sacrifice we make despite our nature, but an expression of our nature at its most sophisticated. We get a world where everyone wins because everyone understands that everyone winning is the only way anyone really wins. That world is possible, that world is logical, that world is beautifully, brilliantly selfish. And that world starts with you choosing to be selfish in the most magnificent way imaginable. The question isn't whether you're selfish, the question is whether you're selfish enough to care about the kind of world your selfishness creates. Are you?